Don't be afraid to make a bunch of noise and slam things. Okay, I'm gonna go see if I can get this YouTube blood on. Hello. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. One, two, three, testing, testing, testing.
That's exactly right. And this is the public meeting room. So here's where the applicant will
Thank you,
make their
Mark.
presentation
You're
from.
welcome.
Okay. But Lawrence is controlling the slides because remember, we put all their applications into one PowerPoint.
Yep, yep. You said it, yeah.
And then,
John's got, I just need to.
Thanks for your.
Good afternoon and welcome to the January 10th, 2024 BAR large meeting here in the public meeting room at 2 George Street. My name is John Robinson. I'm the chairman of the large BAR and I'll serve as the chair for the rest of the evening. The other board members present this afternoon are Jay White, who will be not a good development. Maybe you do accuse, but who will be recusing on agenda items B1 and B2. Luda Sobchuk, who will be with us for the duration of the evening. James Metters, who will be recusing on agenda items B1 and B2. Seaton Brown, Steve Ramos, and Eddie Fava. City staff present are Tory Parrish, city architect, BD Wortham Galvin, incoming city architect, Lawrence Courtney, our staff architect, and Travis Galley, our preservation planner. Sitting in, prepared to be, well, I mentioned them, so we're good to go. You'll see people moving in and out, and that's to accommodate the recusals. Applicants have been required to submit any document that is going to be presented tonight in advance of the meeting. Staff control the slide presentation that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the applicable deadline in accordance with the submittal requirements. The applicant simply needs to ask the staff to advance to whichever slide they want to show us. Applicants, staff, and board members are required to give their name when speaking. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed by the City of Charleston's public meeting channel on YouTube. Your appearance here is your consent to be recorded in perpetuity. The order of each agenda item will be as follows. There will first be an introduction and overview of the project by city staff for the benefit of the board and public. This is followed by the applicant's presentation, which has a 10-minute time limit unless extended in the determination of the chair, and any and all questions of the applicant by the board or staff at the immediate conclusion of that presentation. Any and all presenters should clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, be they the architect, owner, developer, designer, or other consultant, should speak during this portion of the meeting rather than later portions. The applicant's presentation is followed by a public comment period. All applications are part of a public meeting. Written public comments were due noon yesterday, and they have been received and disseminated to the board. As a matter of economy, they will not be read into the record unless requested by a member and accepted by the chair. Written public comments will therefore not be read in toto at the meeting. Any member of the public who is present with us this evening is welcome to speak by approaching the podium. There's a 2-minute time limit on any individual presentation by a member of the public, but we're very glad to hear from you. The public is reminded, particularly if they've not appeared here before, that the comments that they make should be related to architecture, or in tonight's case, the merits of a demolition, as opposed to other concerns such as livability, parking, zoning, or traffic. The public comment period will be followed by city staff comments and recommendations. The applicant is then permitted a 5-minute response period to either the public comments or the city staff comments and recommendations. This response has a 5-minute time limit. The applicant should not feel the need to use it. Brevity is virtue. This is followed by board discussion and a vote. At this point, the applicant's presentation is concluded and public comment is also closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising a hand and waiting to be called upon. Board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and for a potential vote on any agenda item or motion made. The chair will reread the motion verbatim, and the board member should correct me if I have not reread the motion accurately. Once a motion is in proper order and seconded, each member, when voting for the sake of clarity, should say yay in favor or nay not in favor. The results of all votes taken this evening will be posted on the city website at charleston-sc/BAR. As a preliminary matter, no agenda item has been withdrawn or deferred. One last reminder to all of our visitors this evening, please turn off all cell phones or other potentially defective devices. Please limit your comments to architecture or the merits of demolition alone. Comments related to zoning, parking, traffic, lot coverage, as livability are not within the purview of this board, and so as to not jeopardize any result made, should not be voiced here. With that being said, Ms. Parrish, we have agenda item A1.
Item 1 is approval of the minutes from the November 16th, 2023 meeting. This was the BAR retreat. It was a joint meeting of the BARS and BARL.
And just for the benefit of the public, because of the number of members we had present, it's technically a public meeting, had to be advertised, and therefore it has to be documented in accordance with South Carolina FOIA law. There's a motion to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. White. It's in proper order. Mr. Brown, how do you vote? Yea in favor. Mr. Metters, Ms. Sobchak, Mr. White, and myself, yea in favor. Agenda item,
Second item is meeting results from the December 13th BARL meeting.
agenda item A2. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Metters. It's in proper order. Mr. Brown, how do you vote? Yea in favor. Mr. Metters, Ms. Sobchak, Mr. White,
Yea in favor.
myself, yea in favor. Agenda item B1.
Applications. The first application is 159 Calhoun Street. This is College Lodge, and this one is in for demolition. We've got some refusals, so we're on the musical chair. Sorry, gotta jump the gun.
Yep, we'll just take a moment while our regular members are exiting.
Bigger. Okay, now we're ready. So 159 College Street, Calhoun Street is College Lodge, and this one is, this building is not rated. It was constructed in 1963. I had 63 and 64 there, but I confirmed it was 63. It's in Height District 5 and sits within the Old and Historic District. The request is for full demolition of the Downtown Inn, now known as College Lodge, due to student safety, campus needs, and infeasibility of reuse due to seismic requirements, accessibility needs, and limited floor-to-floor heights with modern MEP and that mechanical, electrical, and all the utilities like fire, plumbing, electrical, mechanical. All right, we've got some context slides to show you. This is the aerial showing you the location on Calhoun Street. And this is the street and image from today. And we're looking east on Calhoun. And looking west. All right, we're ready for the applicant.
Very good. Who's appearing before the applicant this evening? Mr. Baker.
Mr. Chairman, Chuck Baker, General Counsel for the College of Charleston, have a matter preliminary to our presentation, which will be given by Paul Patrick. On behalf of the College of Charleston, the applicant, we ask or move, as the case may be appropriate, that Board Member Seton Brown recuse himself from this, as he is a employee of the College of Charleston. We don't see how he can objectively sit in a decision-making capacity on these questions. And either way it turns out, we'll give grounds for appeal from some angle. That's our motion. Be happy to answer any questions about it.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to oblige.
Okay, that'll be fine. Thank you, Mr. Brown. I was going to say we would stand in adjournment while we took legal counsel, but that will not be necessary. And we do have a quorum for purposes of proceeding this evening. And so Mr. Patrick has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate y'all giving us a few minutes here this afternoon. Paul Patrick, Chief of Staff, College of Charleston, City of Charleston resident. My address is 29 Nuffield in West Ashley, Sandhurst neighborhood. You acknowledged early on the 10-minute time frame. I talk pretty fast. I don't think I'm going to need more than 10 minutes, but this is a fairly consequential application for us. And if the board would oblige, maybe a little bit of margin on the upside of 10 minutes.
So we normally give additional time in 5-minute increments, Mr. Patrick. Would you like to request an additional 5 or an additional 10?
An additional 5 will be more than enough, and I don't even know that I'll need that, but I appreciate the indulgence of the
Sure.
board. I also want to, I'm Chief of Staff. I hopefully can answer the great majority of your questions if you have some, but there are things that I may not just be able to answer. So I do want to introduce a few folks that we have with us from the College of Charleston. Obviously, Chuck Baker, our General Counsel, has already introduced himself. We also have the President of the college, my boss, President Andrew Shue. The campus architect is here with us, Christy Schultz. Deputy Chief of Staff, Mark Berry. In the back, we have Ashley Parr, who is the Director of Campus Services, which includes campus housing. And then obviously the architect for us is Simmons Young. But But before I start, two quick things that I want to mention. The first, I hope, is not viewed as patronage, but it is in all sincerity. The college owes a debt of gratitude to this board. The success of our campus is part and parcel to the work that's done here tonight. There's no question that the number one reason students enroll in the College of Charleston is because of the academic reputation of the institution. But year in and year out, when we do an admitted student survey, students say that the reason that they elect to come to the College of Charleston versus going to the University of South Carolina or Clemson or anywhere else is the culture, is the feel, is the fabric of the city of Charleston. And I would submit, by and large part, y'all are a custodian of that very thing that our students identify with when they choose to enroll in August. So I thank the board for that. The college is in a great place. As many of you may have seen, we had a fairly large class in fall of 2023. And looking forward to fall of 24, we could have as many as 30,000 applicants for 2,500 seats at the College of Charleston. So things are really well on George Street, and we thank the board for their preservation. As I start the presentation of the actual agenda item, I want to make something absolutely clear. Our petition to this board is devoid of an economic or an emotional argument. It is brought to this board not lightly, but after many years of study and consultation amongst the entire campus about what is in the best interest of this building and of the College of Charleston students. I hope that the college's reputation in this space of preservation is well known by this board. I think I may be wrong, but I think I'm accurate in saying that we are the largest owner and preservationist of historic structures under the jurisdiction of this board. As you'll see on page 2 of our presentation, the entire downtown campus of the College of Charleston falls under the jurisdiction of the Board of Architectural Review. We have 83 properties on the National Historic Record. We have 8 Category 1 structures on our campus, to include Randolph Hall, Stoll Library, Porter's Lodge, President's House on Glebe Street. 87 structures over 100 years of age and 64 over 150 years of age. We absolutely are sold out and committed to the ideals of preservation. We spend multitudes more than any of our South Carolina public university peers on maintenance and renovation of our projects, because it's an important part of the ethos of our campus. It's an important part of what draws students to the College of Charleston. But we truly feel that this application has merit and is appropriate given the circumstances of the day. My comments on today's presentation are going to kind of run along 2 paths to try and structure this. First, I want to talk to y'all about the merits of the application as they relate to what is put in municipal code, prior decisions of this board, and the design principles adopted in the city's preservation plan. And then the second path that I'll get to towards the end of the presentation are the real and serious limitations of the existing structure at 159 Calhoun. Pages 3 and 4 of your packet begin to sort of kind of show the context and the merits of this building and why we feel like that we are appropriate in asking for this. Certainly, I don't need to recite to this board the language from municipal code, but as I read it, the idea is that when considering request for demolition, that the BAR should consider components like historical and architectural merit, uniqueness, is the building of and is the building Charleston, conformity to the neighborhood, does the building fit in its neighborhood, is it a part of its surrounding, cultural significance, does the building represent something larger than just the building? As you'll see there on page 5, we think that one of these pictures answers all of those questions yes. And we think one of these pictures answers those questions no. The image on the left is something that we view as befitting the ideals and character of Charleston. It is something that likely should have been preserved at the time. The image on the right, we would argue, does not have relevance to Charleston. It does not meet the stated principles of what can and cannot be demolished in the city of Charleston. In our view, these images are a stark reminder of a somewhat unfortunate chapter of Charleston in which we lost architectural treasures and replaced them with buildings that have virtually no identity. Page 6 in the packet begins to show examples of virtually the same downtowner motor inn at 159 in locations all across the country. The simple fact is the downtowner was not designed or built to contribute to the rich architectural history or the urban fabric of Charleston. It was designed in a way that fit Charleston no more or no less than it fit Columbia, Missouri, or Amarillo, Texas. It was built by a corporation to maximize profits. It was a pit stop or a layover on the grand American road trip. It did not fit its surroundings when it was built. The building materials were mass produced. They were void of local craftsmanship. It was the same building built over and over and over in communities all across the country. The bottom line is this building does not meet the guidelines provided for the municipal code that govern decisions related to the demolition of structures under the jurisdiction of the BAR. Now, this is not just our opinion here today. This position that I present to you today was supported by a prior decision of this very bar in 2003, when the college brought forth an application of demolition of this very same structure. The guidelines then are the same guidelines today. The only thing different is time, but everything else was the same. Furthermore, we feel that our position and its alignment with the rules that are established are reinforced by a decision of this board to approve the demolition of 155 Meeting Street. In that instance, this board agreed 4-0 to support a staff analysis, which I read, while Charleston is a living museum, which is evolving over time, and this was an interesting part of our history, the Motor Lodge, and I would offer you can substitute the Downtown Motor Inn, was regrettably ill-suited to its much more urban and historical context, and is increasingly out of place in its location. That same opinion went on to read in the staff comments that the facility was largely prototypical. It had outgrown its usefulness. It had done little to contribute to the urban fabric of the city. We see no difference in that decision and what we are asking you today. So based on all of those factors, we feel that our application here today very much aligns with the stated guidelines governing this decision. However, if there was any question, I now want to talk a little bit about that second track that I mentioned at the start of my presentation, dealing with the real and serious limitations of the existing structure. Pages 7 and 8 of your packet show the structure as it is today, and I know that several of you had the opportunity to go out and do a site visit earlier this morning and see the facility for yourself. For that, I appreciate you doing that. There was some confusion. I want to make sure that the board is aware. The facility is currently offline. It is, I don't know if mothballed is the right word, but it is not an active use. We removed students from it following the spring 23 semester. So this past summer, it was taken offline. We did not feel that the conditions in the building were safe, both structurally and environmentally, to the point that we could continue to house students there. And we certainly had a need for more housing, but we just couldn't convince ourselves that this was an appropriate place to continue to put students. Our objective is to bring back online a facility that is functional, that is safe, and that is healthy for the students of the College of Charleston. After years and years of study, I've been with the college for 10 years, and we've been talking about this building since I've been employed there. We have brought in countless firms. Some firms we've brought in with the stated objective of preserving the building. That was the only reason they were hired. We hired the best firms in the country to do this work, to come in and help us think through an adaptive reuse of this facility. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on that effort, and we've hired multiple firms. One of them's here today that did prior work on this building. But after years of study, it is clear to us that to save the facility would require such a level of renovation and refit that we would greatly compromise the very thing that we're trying to save. The plain truth is the manner in which the structure was built in the 1960s does not lend itself to a renovation today with modern codes, technology, and equipment, and to meet the demands of students. Obviously, those of y'all that have been in the building, it has major complications with floor to ceiling heights, the existing complications of the 7-foot ceilings, and how to fit modern and environmentally responsible MEP equipment into the existing framework were made much worse by the significant seismic upgrades that are required on the facility. You know, we were going through our study on this when the collapse in South Florida happened, which sort of kind of made everybody do a new set of calculus on how do you think about buildings? How do you think about these concrete structures? What is safe? What is not? And so that was, while we were trying to march on this path, it was a major rock in the road and very much diverted on how we think about these things. The safety of our students, faculty, and staff is and always will be our first priority at the College of Charleston. Page 9 begins to show how any reuse would require essentially rebuilding the building from the inside out. The modifications consume already limited square footage in the building and make the future use greatly diminished in what we can do with it today. As you work through the presentation, starting with slide 10, you begin to see what we've tried to do for you all is model the facility and sort of kind of walk through the various modifications that would be required. So this is the building as it is. And then as you go to slide 11, it will show the seismic upgrades that are required. If you go to 12, it'll show the MEP upgrades that are required. If you go to 13, it will show the accessibility and egress modifications that will be done. And then finally on slide 14 is the sum total of what is required to be able to try and force the use of this building into the existing structure. I think we can all agree this is not minimal work. This is a major, major project that begins to make significant changes to many of the things that are trying to be preserved. To achieve a functional, safe, and healthy building, we are effectively rebuilding the entire structure from the inside out. In our view, the merits of the structure, the merits as you think about them within the guidelines established in municipal code, the merits of the structure do not raise this building to this level of refit or renovation. We recognize, and we have pained over this building. We recognize the desires and the calls for preservation. And I would submit 9 out of 10 times when we work on buildings at the College of Charleston, we save the building and continue to use it. But in this case, we cannot get there as an institution. In this case, we find a highly nuanced situation in which the preservation and the ideals of preservation are in tension with building code and the pursuit of a safe and healthy building for the College of Charleston. So in conclusion, I know those are y'all's favorite words to ever hear. In conclusion, we feel that our initial argument based on the guidelines provided in code and prior precedent are well-reasoned and support this board making the decision for approval of demolition, a position that we think is further supported by the existing conditions that are there today, and that the building simply does not, at this point, warrant preservation. We ask that you support our request. We ask that you support the prior decision of this board in 2003 and approve our petition for demolition.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Any questions from the board at this time of the applicant or the applicant's team?
Okay, so
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Ramos.
going back to the 2003 PAR, was it an approval? That was my question. What was it, what happened at that meeting?
Yeah, so my understanding is it was. So as of 8 o'clock this morning, I was under the impression that it was an outright demolition of the entire facility. About noon, I began to question whether or not that was in fact the case. And just a few minutes ago, we did find and I can submit this to the board, we did find the application for demolition and debris removal of existing 6-story residence hall that was approved on June the 2nd of 2003. And so I don't know who I would give this to. Tori, do you take this? So, yeah, we've been worried about that very question but that we just got that back today.
So for most people probably know this, but those things expire, right?
Sure.
They have today it would have a 2-year.
Right.
The building itself, you mentioned 4-to-4 heights, you said 7 feet. Are they actually 7 feet clear or is that?
I see 7 feet 4 inches on the slide behind us.
7 feet 4 inches. Everybody's nodding in agreement?
Which is a low ceiling. The floor slabs, which were cantilevered in some of the old photographs, and now they have steel columns. I'm assuming those are needed for structural reasons. Was that talked about in any of the structural reports?
See, now you're way out of my depth. I'm gonna defer, who wants to help? Christie, can you?
But yes,
Yep.
those would be required by today's code.
And then last, I'm just curious, there's the Shepherd Ferry mural on Calhoun Street, which has been up for how many years?
Over 10.
Okay,
Yeah, as I understand it, the Shepherd Ferry, and for those, it's a sticker. It's not painted on, it's a sticker. It was installed over 10 years ago under a temporary signage permit that, to the best of our knowledge, has long since expired.
and does anybody know if the multicolored glass that's shown in the historic photos is behind that?
Well, so the photos will show, and there's a bunch of appendix in here. It was painted at one point in time, the kind of same pinkish hue. We seem to paint everything. And so those multicolored panels were clearly painted, but I would assume that they are still there.
Well,
Nope, maybe
I'm
not.
gonna suggest that those panels were lost. And before the mural came up, that was just paint on the wall. I don't think the panels are there. However, I am not sure.
I do know it was painted pink.
That was my last question.
There will, of course, be occasion for this, but any further board questions at this juncture? Mr. Fabian?
I have a question, Mr. Patrick. Who's the engineer that's providing you all with this information?
ADC is currently doing the structural work for us.
Okay, because just it'd be helpful maybe to hear some of
Okay.
the specifics. I don't know if there's been anything in Ms. Schultz mentioned this morning, but related to hazmat issues, and there've been letters that have been submitted that said the engineer notes there are no code triggers. The substantial interventions as proposed are not required. It's in good condition from a life safety perspective, and I don't know if ADC said that or where that's coming.
I'm confident in working with ADC. We can answer whatever questions the board may have, but they are currently the structural engineer.
And if you'd like, I'd like to add a little bit because I have spoken to them.
Sure.
Just yesterday. So, in speaking with them, when they made that report, they were looking at the building as is. This was before we had talked about the mechanical system that we would put in this building to keep mold out.
Right.
So with that system, we are putting in pretty big penetrations through every floor and every other suite. So if we were to flip back a couple slides, I think you can see the number of penetrations, and most of those are about 3.5 feet by 4.5 feet in size. And a lot of that is to get around rebar. There's nothing consistent. It's a slab poured in place. So in speaking with the engineer yesterday about that development that he did not put into his report, he felt that most likely that would trigger a required seismic upgrade. The other thing that I imagine is that OSC will require it. They have required it on other buildings and pretty serious.
Who's the mechanical engineer?
I'm sorry,
Mechanical engineer?
mechanical engineer, DWG.
Yeah, you were asking mechanical engineer, and OSC is Office of State Engineer. So as a state building, we're gonna fall under the building codes of the Office of State Engineer, not the city of Charleston. So that,
But you have an engineer on board the same.
yes,
Yes.
DWG is doing the mechanical work.
Very good. Any further board comments at this time? Okay,
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Appreciate
thank you, Mr. Patrick. Public comments, friendly reminder, approach the microphone, identify yourself and address. And 2-minute time limit, and please keep comments germane to the authority of this board, which in this case would be the propriety of demolition.
My name is Steve Coe. I own Happy Hotel Architects, been in Charleston for 31 years. I live in Northbridge in West Ashley. My 31 years of practice here in Charleston, I've been numerous projects in front of this board that have required demolition of historic buildings, private Tech Palmer Campus, Jackson Davenport, Jewish Studies. More recently, Rita Hollings Science Center at the College of Charleston, which involved a 1974 science building that needed to be renovated and major seismic upfit. So I think I know a little bit about this project because in 2003, my firm did a major renovation design of this building that included that demolition submittal that was done after we submitted our renovation project. And because of costs at that point, it was determined they were going to spend that kind of money to renovate the building. And there was a requirement at that point from the state engineer to do seismic upfits that the college decided it might be in their best interest to replace it. We've also done the 2013 study with ADC that looked at many of the seismic issues. We've done life safety repairs to the existing railings that you were talking about, some of which were existing, but because of concerns by the college with student safety, because of the openings and sizes of those, we augmented those exterior rails with new steel railing. We replaced existing electrical panels that were known fire hazards. So I know a lot about this building doing, I don't know, over the course of 30 years, it feels like a lot of projects. I am here to say that I feel that this building has a very, very restrictive context for a renovation. And even if it were to be renovated, by the time you look at what has to be done mainly for seismic and for HVAC, the rooms literally will not meet standards that students expect. I have a daughter in college and I can tell you it is a very big decision to make about where you send your child and what type of housing that they live in. And there are standards and goals that the college has to try and meet what they're competing at other institutions. A renovation of this building and the size of these rooms, floor to floor heights, talk about 17.4. That's literally the top of the door frame here, basically. The ceilings are very, very low and very small. The windows that you asked about, there were not windows on that end, they're painted panels. There's no glass on the face on Calhoun. What's changed since we did our last design project there is seismic requirements have gotten more strict. The International Existing Building Code and change of use has gotten more strict. The energy codes have become more strict, and all of those have impacts on the end result of what you can do. In my opinion, this is not a building that is capable of being renovated to the level that would be expected from a cost perspective, but also from an end use perspective to be a quality space that people would want to be in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coe. Other members of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda item?
My name is Daniel Ravenel. I live at 68 Broad Street on the peninsula. I'm a lifelong resident of Charleston. I'm also president of the Preservation Society. I was a trustee of the College of Charleston. I used to go to bed at night worried about whether this building was going to collapse, or probably more expected would be somebody falling off the building. And I can tell you that's a bit of a burden when you're in the positions I've held. I know that y'all have your own definition of what is historic, but I don't think this is a very good representation of historic as it relates to this particular building. I don't believe that anything can be done, unfortunately, but tear it down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ravenel. Other members of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda item?
Good evening. My name is James Ward. I'm a former professor at the College of Charleston. I was involved in the original landscape design of the place in the 70s and 80s, working with Ed Pinkney Associates, and taught in preservation and planning for 20 years there. So I'm a little vested in this project. I have something prepared, but having heard a very forceful presentation about the really strong functional concerns, I have some more or less random, but hopefully germane thoughts, more germane thoughts. One is, first of all, 20 years becomes history rather quickly. And as that previous application has run out anyway, we're dealing with a different kind of situation. Number two, as we look at this streetscape, including mostly college structures, I think you have to say we're looking at, I hate to be insulting, but at best, a mediocre streetscape. I like the trees, I like the wall, I like the landscape elements, but the buildings, you know, I don't know. I think one of the members of the BAR once referred to the color that was painted on there as prune whiz. And I think that becomes appropriate as we think about it. However, having been involved in several other building projects downtown, for example, at the VRTC, when we first looked at the Marchink warehouse behind the Bob Dean's warehouse, it was nothing more than a tin-clad wood structure falling down. In fact, I even found someone who had been murdered in the basement. It's hard to describe a situation that was more deplorable than that, both in terms of life safety or in terms of aesthetics. However, what was deemed appropriate because of sort of the massive history for that site, but to that extent, all of our sites here in the city convey the same kind of weight of history. We decided to rebuild the thing in kind of a, how do we say, a skeletal mirror image of what was there before, suited for its new use. In other words, I'm not suggesting exactly that this building could become a facade-me, you know, where we leave the facade in place. But I do think something that respects the footprint of this building, given the weight of the structural and air conditioning and mechanical issues that it faces, might be appropriate. And I'm just wondering, as I'm thinking about this, what leverage this board might have in terms of trying to get something worthwhile that will help to speak to a more nuanced and, shall we say, appropriate historical streetscape as we don't on Calhoun Street. I think it really could work for the benefit of both the college and the city if we were to do that. We don't just need another cookie cutter, let's do a histo presto building there. And I really feel strongly that this represents an opportunity for us to enliven our streetscape and to do something to reflect those layers of history, which is what preservation is supposed to be all about. Buildings can learn, architects can learn, we can all learn, and perhaps even from this building itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Boyd. Other members of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda item?
Good evening. My name is Patricia Stone. I'm a preservationist in the city, and I'm also a College of Charleston alum. I just have some brief trains of thought to present to you. College Lodge is a rare example of modernism in Charleston that is not only rare, but also accessible to people that are both students and young professionals my age. College Lodge is also a building that is on the College Charleston campus, and it has a specific culture within the building, not just within the campus. So its cultural significance both extends outside of the College of Charleston and means more to the students who specifically lived in that building. I believe that this building already has an embodied energy that the new construction that embodied energy would be expansively more than perhaps the embodied energy that would result from a renovation of this structure. And finally, I believe that while Charleston is full of amazing examples of 18th and 19th century buildings, we have few and far between examples of Charleston's modernist history. And so I think that the modern architecture in Charleston is equally deserving of our care and our resources as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Further members of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda item? Ms. Minion.
Good afternoon, Erin Mahard with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society appreciates the College of Charleston for being in communication with us about this request. While we are very supportive of the college's goals for growth and improvement, we do not support the proposal for demolition of College Lodge as a way to achieve those goals. Preservation of this unique mid-century building is vitally important. The Downtowner Motor Inn franchise was once a major fixture in cities across the nation, with its identifiable, colorful, bold architecture that captured the spirit of middle-class America during this period. Unfortunately, many have been lost or insensitively redeveloped, and today College Lodge is the last remaining intact example of a downtowner building in South Carolina. Upon learning of the proposed demolition of College Lodge, the Preservation Society reached out to the State Historic Preservation Office to gain an expert opinion on the historic significance of the building. In response, on January 3rd, the SHPO officially determined College Lodge to be eligible for individual listing on the National Register of Historic Places. This is a very high threshold to achieve and indicates it is a historic resource worthy of preservation. Specifically, the state architectural historian noted the property is significant because it is, quote, an unusual example of modernism in downtown Charleston and one of the few, if not only, examples of mid-century modern motel design remaining downtown that conveys important historical and architectural associations as a post-war modern motel in Charleston. We hope you had a chance to review a copy of the SHPO's letter we submitted in advance. The BAR's charge is to protect Charleston's built heritage, which is made up of layers of history and a diverse architectural landscape. To meet this charge, the board should defend this building from demolition. As a rare surviving example of mid-century development downtown, College Lodge contributes to our city's historic tapestry and helps showcase the evolution of our city over time. Further, the application does not contain sufficient information to justify demolition. The engineer notes there are no code triggers to update the building for seismic reinforcement, and substantial structural interventions being proposed are not required and not a justification to demolish the building. We are pleased to see the engineer finds the building to be in good condition from a life safety perspective and provides a roadmap for repairs to current deficiencies. In that vein, there have been numerous other examples of similarly aged and styled buildings that have been successfully maintained and rehabilitated, including the 1960s Starlight Motor Inn right here in Charleston, which was in far worse condition than College Lodge and fully and authentically restored, as well as the Savannah Downtowner building that SCAD has sustained long-term as a dormitory with sensitive upgrades that retain the original design. There is ample opportunity for the site to be creatively redeveloped to meet the college's program goals for new open space, amenities and retail, and even expanded housing, while also preserving the building for continued use that has not been adequately explored. College Lodge is an asset to the whole community because it is a highly unique and significant mid-century structure with incredible potential to convey history of this period to current and future generations. And therefore, we ask the board to deny the request for demolition. The Preservation Society urges the college to pursue a preservation-sensitive rehabilitation, and we stand ready to support that effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Further members of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda item?
Good evening, Justin Schwebler, the Historic Charleston Foundation. We'd like to thank the college for giving us an extensive tour of the property so that we could have a full assessment of the condition of the building and understand the challenges the college faces in bringing College Lodge back online as a dormitory. While the proposed utility modifications and seismic remediation would have a significant destructive impact on the original fabric of the building, we do not find these to be a reasonable justification for the demolition of a mid-century landmark in the heart of Charleston's commercial district. College Lodge, or the Downtowner Motor Inn, is an emblematic part of Charleston's 20th century architectural heritage and has been a cultural landmark for generations of College of Charleston students who have called for the time. While we appreciate the college's additional justification for demolition that they're trying to be financially responsible with state funds for the future of College Lodge, there's overwhelming data that shows preservation and adaptive reuse, particularly of buildings constructed of steel reinforced concrete, is far more financially and environmentally sustainable than demolition of new construction. Therefore, preservation of the building and upfitting would be the most financially responsible option. Preserving this building will be a challenging project. But we're hopeful that with the long history of the college's stewardship of historic properties, it will keep College Lodge as another resource in their incredible inventory of historic buildings that makes College of Charleston a world-class campus and save another important part of Charleston's mid-century architectural landscape. We recommend denial of the application of 159 Calhoun. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Additional members of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda? Seeing none, city staff comments or recommendations?
Okay, I'm going to provide you with a little bit of staff context. I want to remind you that the purposes of our historic districts are advanced through the preservation and protection of old historic or architecturally worthy structures in white neighborhoods, which in part which impart a distinct aspect to the city and which serve as visual reminders of the historical and cultural heritage of the city, the state, and the nation. And so I think the question that you've got to consider here tonight is whether this is a worthy visual reminder. A decision on this demolition request is not about personal preferences or future use, but whether the application meets the criteria for demolition. And then referring back to the ordinance, I always like to do this. The ordinance gives us some criteria to consider, but it does say that we should consider these among other things. These are historic, architectural, and aesthetic features of the structure, nature and character of the surrounding area, historic, culturally important use of such structure, and importance to the city. All right, so in staff comments, we're weighing these considerations, and I think that you'll find that the span of these comments represents the span of some of the public comment. Number one, this is one of the few mid-century structures remaining in downtown. Aesthetically, it features horizontal lines, the DT breeze block, the cantilevered exterior circulation, though this feature has been significantly altered with vertical supports and taller guardrails, which actually dilute the purity of this feature's design. The solid but paneled and now painted elevation facing Calhoun Street was indicative of the downtown or motor inn. The 2007 Preservation Plan for Charleston, Vision Community Heritage, describes the time of the downtowners' construction as a time when the prosperity of the post-war period was restored, but came at the expense of the inner city as suburban development began to decentralize Charleston, a city that had been for its entire history a compact urban settlement confined to a small peninsula. I share that so that you know what was occurring in the built environment during that time. Number three, the downtown or motor inn was one of many and one of four in the state, and the structure's features are prototypical of the brand. It certainly was not the only urban location. However, not all of the downtowners featured hidden parking, with some opting for surface parking lots, and the orientation and parking incorporation of this one are somewhat unique. The structure was the downtown motor inn for a little over a decade, being acquired by the College of Charleston in 1975. Cultural significance may be best tied to its life as a dormitory. The BAR did not have jurisdiction over this property until 1975, and staff would not recommend approval of this design if it came before us today. I could talk about it more if you want. For example, we would recommend a more engaging ground floor experience. However, the structure represents a brief period in rare architectural style in our city's involvement. Number six, BAR staff have reviewed SHPO's letter of late last week in response to a preliminary information form indicating SHPO's opinion that the structure is eligible to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. However, staff has not received or reviewed the submittal packet to SHPO, and I'd like to spend one moment on that just to give you some clarification from SHPO. No, the applicant does not have to be the property owner. What was submitted is a preliminary information form, which is a special form that SHPO uses to provide an opinion on whether something is eligible. It is one of the first steps for having a property evaluated, and the SHPO does this frequently, but only the National Park Service has the authority to actually list the property. Okay, number seven, the desire to update the structures and systems in this structure is understandable and somewhat compelling, but the current application does not demonstrate or convince that those alterations would ruin the exterior features. So what I'm trying to say is that we don't fully understand the impact to the exterior. And then our recommendation, not being taken lightly, but deliberated at length, is for deferral for information regarding an impact to the exterior due to required and desired upgrades, and for review of the packet submitted to SHPO.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Parrish. The applicant now has an up to 5-minute time period to respond to either public comment or city and staff comments, I should say, and or if they choose to use it.
We certainly, Christy may have a comment or two. We certainly won't take anywhere near 5 minutes. Tori, thank you so much. I mean, I think this SHPO piece has caused us all a little bit of confusion, and that to us, their letter was somewhat unclear. We don't think the property has been deemed eligible. We think that SHPO has said it may very well meet some of the criteria, but they don't make that determination. So I want everybody to be careful in I think words matter a lot here. To say that it's eligible, I don't know that determination and our understanding has yet to be made. As far as, and Christy alluded to this, the ADC report regarding the seismic upgrades was a report that was drafted without the consideration of the significant demolition that's going to be required for the MEP. And so in some subsequent conversations with ADC, they sort of kind of reserve their right to be able to do those calculations on as to whether or not the seismic upgrades would be required. And then I would, we mentioned earlier, and I think this is an important piece, our requirements are more driven by Columbia and Office of State Engineer than they are by City of Charleston code enforcement officers. And so I think some additional conversation on that front may be warranted as well, that we are happy to engage with staff about.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick.
Yeah, I can go into a little bit more detail of the structural report. Just, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, their big concerns are that there is no load path from the upper floors to the foundation. The shear walls on the upper floors have no corresponding shear walls on the first floor, which creates soft story. So the concern is if we do have a seismic event, and keep in mind that we are in the highest seismic zone, the building may very well pancake. So I think the college, being responsible for lives, we take this very seriously. Even though at the time that the engineer did do his analysis and he did it as is, as if the building was staying as is, and not having these penetrations put into the floor slabs. It did not require a seismic upgrade. The college, we feel that that is our primary responsibility, the safety of somebody's child staying there. So I wanted to add that. I also wanted to say, and I understand that you do need more illustrations showing the impact of these seismic upgrades. But if we do flip back to the structural report, which I think you have, and the floor plan, the dimensions on the exterior of the building will be impacted. And part of what is unique about this building, if you keep going, there you go. Well, let's go to start with the ground floor. But on the ground floor, we have several columns. And each of those columns, which really to me are they're pretty important in mid-century architecture. I'm not sure, but they're about 16 inches, maybe 16 by 8 now, but they will require, I believe it's a 8-inch jacket, concrete jacket around it, which will really change the proportions of this building. And then the same with the walls where you see the red lines. And if you go up to the next floor plan, on the upper floor plans, each place where you see those lines, we will be required to add 8 additional inches of poured-in-place concrete. So when you do go to the elevation, that will change the proportion of this design. It will cause an impact. And then the other thing, the mechanical, we will have a significant amount of mechanical up on the roof, which will then require screening. So what is now these nice slick horizontal lines and vertical, real thin verticals, that will change. So we feel that a lot of the architectural integrity that we are trying to say will be impacted. So I did want to put that in there. I respect needing to see this drawn out, but there will be impacts.
Thank you very much to the applicant.
Thank you.
We're now moving on to the portion of this application where we have board discussion and presumably a vote on this matter. What do my fellow board members have to say about the presentation?
Well, it's not an easy decision. I know that there's, I think, some reasons put forth by the college about the challenges with rehabilitating the building. Not that it can't be done, but just in making a usable, viable structure. And as an architect, you want to make spaces that really people want to be in, sleep in, go to work in, and 7'4" ceilings. And there is a motel. I do see the shortcomings of that, and I'm sympathetic to that. Um, the key features of the building, to me, the cantilevered balconies, which have kind of been boogered up by all the steel, are certainly not as attractive as the imagery of the historic photographs show. To me, that's probably maybe the most important key feature. And then the colored panels, which are hidden, another key defining feature are, well, it's not there right now. So to me, that's challenging to say that this building is what it was and should be kept. However, it clearly is a building of its time. I mean, there's no question that it is a building of its time. And we do not have many buildings like this in Charleston. Maybe this is the only one. I mean, and so that is something you can't argue with. I think it's clearly a building of its time, but maybe not of its place. And I think this board has a tough decision about how that factors into this discussion. So for all those reasons, it's challenging.
Other board comments?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, please.
It again, and this is not to necessarily say I've kind of made my mind up either way, but through the rose-colored glasses and looking at it, it's an awesome building, and it's the kind of building I remember as a young child, and we'd be transferred in the Navy across country. It's the only kind of motel we could afford to stay at, and just enjoyed it, and I appreciate the architecture of it. I was able to see it this morning in person, and I do think that's a huge component of those making the decision on this. It might be nice to take advantage of that, depending upon how things go with the motion today, just to revisit that. Another thing that I think would be very important is to hear from the engineer, both structural and mechanical, electrical and plumbing directly. And no offense to the presentation made by the college, it was thorough and awesome, but there is some confusion, as I say, I think, or at least in the public realm, from some of the letters that have been submitted that said that, there are no code triggers, there's no, and I'm not a structural engineer, but even walking through as an architect seeing it, it certainly warranted seismic upgrades. There were hazmat materials, there were things that with the 7'8" ceiling height, as Mr. Ramos had referenced, with all of the things that are going to have to happen to it, what's the resulting space going to be like? What's the resulting architecture going to be like? Is it going to be kind of our vision of what it was? And I'm not sure that's the case, but it would be interesting to hear from the engineer if that's something that could be challenged enough to accommodate. The other thing, and I appreciate the letters and the petition from those that sent and signed it, but I do think there's some question and a little bit perhaps of a misstep in some of the letters and the statement from the Preservation Society with the saying the property meets the criteria for the listing in the National Register of Historic Places. And in reality, it's, I think Archives and History said it's their opinion that it can meet the criteria, but they can't guarantee a listing, and it's not them that could give the listing. So I think that's a little bit of a misstatement there, that it'd be nice just for clarity for public and the record to know how that plays out. But most substantial, I feel like that with all of the required elements to accommodate what I would anticipate would be needed to meet code, particularly seismic, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural. I mean, all of that thing, the cantilevered balconies, you see spalling concrete. So, I mean, if those have to be completely taken down and redone, it's a whole other ballgame. And I don't know that we've got that level of information, although this is very thorough, but it would be helpful to have just some confirmation of that, because statements, for those in favor, and they may be accurate, it referenced previous statements by the engineer that said that it doesn't need to be that invasive, when in fact it may. So my opinion is I think we need some more of that to make a little bit more informed decision.
Thank you, Mr. Faden.
Okay,
Ms. Sobchak.
it is a dilemma, no question about, and I agree with my colleagues that we really need more information. But strictly speaking, architecture here, and I don't know why is that we have rights to dismiss any error of architecture. I mean, sixties, we've been really down on that era, but at the same time, it's this international style which has rights to exist within fabric of our city, regardless that we are trying to be preserving 17th, 16th century or whatever. So just speaking of that, I really in agreement with Historic Charleston Preservation and Preservation Society that this building has merits and location is right, actually, because it's a center, so it represents its own style and there. As far as the, you know, I'm looking at this plan and not sure I understand why the exterior will change that much, because there's only two sides, which has this exterior lines, which will need to be upgraded. Yes, ceiling height, but we actually have a courthouse, new courthouse, which is like 7 feet ceiling height next to the old post office. It has its merits as an architecture to me. And seismic, I lived in Central Asia and they were renovating and upgrading seismic structures again and again and again. And these areas are much more stronger than seismic every day, just about. I don't want to feel like I'm discouraging anyone, but I think we need more information, as we said, that this cannot be actually restored, upgraded. Another question is, does it have to be dormitory? You know, can it be rehabilitated to some other spaces, and what can be open and make it bigger spaces interior wise and things like that. I think I leave it there.
Very good. I'm gonna try not to replow same ground and also be helpful to the applicants and the public who are here this evening. Number one would be that Mr. Patrick's presentation was excellent. Slides are thorough. Even in that presentation, as you've heard board members who are design experts and I'm not, there seems to be a little bit of conflict between what could be done currently with the building in any capacity to make it safer versus what's been stated by Ms. Sobchak, which is that we envision it being used as a dormitory in the future. In order to make that viable, we have to do these things. And so that's one bifurcation of information we need to get clear. And then the second bifurcation of information that we would want is, because I don't want any of the applicants to be tripped up by this, is to get the engineers to say, this is what we can do with the building now, and this is what it would look like on the exterior. And this is what we're hoping to achieve with a future presumed continued dorm use and what it would look like if we do that. Why does that matter? Well, our limitations are that we are not a zoning board. We get to decide what it looks like from the outside and how that fits into the neighborhood and how that fits in a historic context and what the merits of the building itself are. So that's why I say, in looking at what the engineers do or do not represent, I would get them rather than you to say, this is what it looks like if we repurpose it as it exists versus our perceived future use being a building that has built-in life safety for students and how that's going to affect the exterior appearance of the building. So that's the first thing I give you. The second one is, and I've had this conversation not in relation to this application, but a problem that comes before this board more and more frequently. And I say this is the benefit of the applicant. We have, we as a board, even in my relatively brief tenure, struggled with wanting to save buildings from a specific historical era, not maybe because of their own particular merits, but because we unfortunately have wiped out that entire class of building in Charleston. I know we've had several Art Deco projects that I could refer you to that were the case. The other one that I struggle with here is I thoroughly understand the problems with using this building as a dormitory. It has had some modifications. It has had some retrofitting. On the spectrum of buildings that we have approved for a demo, this one, has less of those modifications that you've seen over time, A, because it's newer, and B, obviously in the history of this building, no one wanted to sink a huge amount of money into it, which conversely, ironically, leads it to be more intact than some of the other buildings we see presented for us for a demo. And I just say that to indicate our trying to reconcile the public's desire and preservation's desire to save buildings like this when we acknowledge that this building in and of itself does not have a deep historical connection to Charleston. It's more that it is a building of its time and place. And as Ms. Sobchak said, international style, modern style buildings shouldn't be wiped out as a class. And we have a conflict about that because a lot of buildings with more merit than this that you'd see in Charleston are gone or don't exist. And there are some other ones. I'm specifically thinking about where's there been a decent adaptive reuse for a building that was really aged and it did well. The Johnson & Johnson insurance building would be an example of that. That's a little older than this, but managed to be redone. I'm not saying that to presage anything, because what it really comes down to is when our staff tells us they don't punt. They don't punt on things. They either say approve, deny, or approve with these 15 conditions, which we generally respect, and if anything, just add to rather than delete. We seldom get a deferral. The deferral that I see here for the benefit of the public and certainly for our applicant is there's a little, not through any fault of the applicant, but there's a little ambiguity on the engineering issues. And so we really ought to hear from the engineer about what we've just framed out. I think my board members would agree in the past few minutes. And then number two, to the extent that it's worth considering getting some clarity about SHPO, because I know that the staff had clarity about SHPO. Having worked with that and through that process before, there is ambiguity there. And so whatever it is they're going to follow up with, I think I would want to see. All of which is to say that I think we entertain a deferral, not to kick the can, but do not have incomplete information before we make a decision. And make sure we're straight on engineering of the building as is versus, the owner's ideal usage, which we certainly understand. It's one of the things we consider is it's a part of college campus. Of course, it's top use or historic use has been being a dorm. So all of which is to say, I think that entertaining specifically the staff's recommendation that we do a deferral incorporating staff comments and board comments.
I also want to mention that there is other ways of designing mechanical system rather than central. There are a bunch of ways. So, and not to really destroy the building, what you're saying it will be. That's another maybe point to explore.
Thank you, Ms. Sobchak. Further board comments or motion?
I'll make the motion for deferral, board and staff comments. And again, as our chairman said, certainly not to kick the can, but I think particularly with this building, it even benefits from being heard twice and having the opportunity for the public and others to weigh in on it. But particularly the board, I think would benefit from being able to hear from the engineers at the meeting. So recommendation for deferral with board and staff.
Thank you, Mr. Fava. Is there a second to the motion as stated? It's in proper order. Mr. Ramos, how do you vote on the motion?
Yay in favor?
Mr. Fava?
Yay.
Mr. Sobchak and myself in favor. We look forward to working with the applicant to get those unresolved issues on the record and get you back in here as soon at a board meeting. Thank you. Okay, so we'll allow people to clear the room, but for the benefit of the public, because this agenda item was deferred, we will not have a hearing on the next item because we cannot approve a building where one currently exists. So hopefully that makes sense.
The thing is that 30 years from now, the building is proposing saying, oh, no, this is not.
I think I mean, the presentation is very thorough. They're just, it's obvious, they're trying to reconcile. Right.
And I think
Information will change over time.
Decision, you want to have every card on the table.
That's right.
Well,
I fully believe them when they say if we do what we're proposing to do, there's gonna be significant exterior changes. Well, I would you and say that? Yes.
actually, personally, very.
Well, I think that's because there've just been so many losses in the past, people are more sensitive to what remains.
You know, it's
So I have a good friend who's got her master's in preservation and she does great work, and her passion was really for Art Deco. Streamlined modern buildings, the few that we have in Charleston. And when you go back and look at the records, there weren't that many built before, a lot of them.
I don't think we have any recalls.
So, you know, I will say, I'm gonna say something. Inappropriate, I mean, all this was posted on Instagram, like it was already meant to list things. You know, I mean, this is what. I can look up a lot. It could. It could, and if you just quoted what the letter said, it'd be fine.
yeah, but there's not, unusual.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate your help this evening. Good thoughts, good comments as always.
So.
I appreciate the designer saying
Literally,
this is my list.
Yeah, of course.
Good, how are you? Good.
Okay.
Hey.
Very good. Thank you to our alternates for taking time out of your day to come help us out. Have forum. Thank you. Thank you, Eddie. Agenda item number 3, 649 King Street.
649 King Street is new construction. This is in the Canterbury, Elliottboro, Height Districts are 4 and 6, and the Old and Historic District. This one is for final approval for construction of a 15-unit apartment building with ground floor retail. Context slides, please. Courier Square 2 occupies the larger the larger box, and this particular building is building 2, and it's the smaller box. These are existing site photos. So. You feel good about what you're doing. Okay. All right, we're ready for the applicant.
My name is Dylan Tao. I'm with LSRP, the architect on the project here. I've got a few members from my team as well as the owner and Greg Star here. Appreciate the board's time. I hope what you'll see here is really this is a continuation of refinement of the design and the details of the approval we got back in February of this project. So want to move to the next slide. Oh, perfect. Clicker. Awesome. So just quickly going back to some of the comments that we got back in February, and I'll address how we've adjusted or modified the designs based upon those comments going forward on the particular elevations. The real comments that we got, we highlighted up here were studying some refinement to the columns on the west side of the building that felt like they didn't really relate to the design as it was then. And also to look at studying thinning up and making a little bit more intricate the canopy design, which is around 3 sides of the buildings at that point. And then some questions about GFRC and FRP, which we're not getting into unless you have questions. So moving on, as Tori mentioned, so our particular project here is 649 King on the corner of King and Vine Street. The other 3 buildings you've seen in the past have come before the board previously. And I'll quickly go through just ground floor plan here again. No substantial changes to what you guys have seen last time. For this time, it's really again just refining the design as we work through the details, both with the contracting team and with particular vendors as we refine this. So ground floor plan as you see it currently. This would be the second through fourth level plan, which is really 5 apartments with some balcony spaces on the north, south, and west. These are our current reflected ceiling plans of the spaces. Again, just residential use, as you can see some of the balconies associated with those. And then our rooftop plan. One thing I did want to point out on the rooftop here, I know it's often a question about rooftop screening. We feel like we've done a good many studies on this project, given the vantage point of where we've placed some mechanical equipment being centralized on the rooftop, that we do not feel we need equipment screening. Obviously, if that's an issue later, we would address that. But as we've planned it on to be centrally located, we don't see a concern as far as visibility goes, and it includes from the elevated highway. We've done a lot of reviews of the 3D model to show that. And really, these are just comparisons of the last time you guys saw the design on the top versus the current proposed design on the bottom. Again, nothing that's changed substantially from what was there. It's really just refining the design. I'll go through some of those design elements as we look through those in large detail as we go forward. So this is the east facade facing King Street. As I mentioned here, the canopy here, and this reflects all 3 canopies that are on the building, which are basically the main retail entry points or potential retail entry points. Previously, that canopy was about 28 inches deep. It's now 18 inches deep, and 18 inches thick. And it protrudes about 5 feet from the face of the building. The other thing we've done with that canopy is actually slid it below that cast stone band, and we really felt like before it kind of was in an awkward spot where it was kind of halfway between the two, and you really couldn't see a cast stone band continue around the building. We felt like thinning it up and moving it down made more sense for the overall design, which you see reflected here. This is the north elevation facing Lime Street. Again, the same comments about the canopies here. And you'll start to see some of the changes to the columns that are on the west side of the building, which you'll see in the next, the western elevation. But here's that elevation again enlarged. I can talk about some of the materials, but I have material samples in it. Last time at preliminary, we did not have those here, so we brought those for the benefit of the board to see what those look like now. We've got a granite base, 2 different colors of reddish brick that are interwoven on the facade, and then a black brick, which you'll see as accents. We've got, again, some FRP, metal panel, and stone, and then some colors associated for trim in there. So this is the western facade, as I mentioned before. One of the comments that we received, here's the enlarged version of that, and I'll show the enlarged column version as well, was just the lack of detail in those columns. So before they were a rounded column, we've gone back and looked at what we think is a better option here with the squared column. They've got some fluting on those, which are reflected in some details as well in the canopy. So we really feel like that helps tie the 2 of those together as a way to make it more harmonious. Let's see, this is also, you can visit the south elevation on this side. There's not really any changes that we're thinking about, again, other than the canopy coming off the central portion of that. As I mentioned, here's kind of a colored rendition of the corner piece, just so you guys can see where all these materials kind of end up. So you see the darker brick interwoven with the lighter brick, and the black banding in between, which is that dark black brick. The green that's on here is the FRP that we've talked about before. Again, same seam metal roof on the corner, and then cast stone headers above some of the windows, and as cornice spans across the building. Building section, wall sections, again, and I'll more reference the actual enlarged details to talk about these as we go through, but some through the balconies and the bays, and then as well as the corner piece there at King Street.
You want us to try it? Oh, there you go.
And I've got things
Okay.
that's being slow.
Okay.
All right, this is our first set of enlarged elevations, enlarged sections. I just wanted to point out a couple of these. Again, this is the one on the top left is the FRP cornice at the top of the building. I did want to point out too, you'll see, and it was on the elevations, but we've got some recessed brick panels that occur over the various retail entries that are reflected here. They're set back in 1/2-inch steps And there's a banding around those. Again, I'll show you those in the Mars elevations there. And then the bottom right is the current canopy design. As I mentioned, on that one, we've got about an 18-inch deep fascia piece on that. So we've thinned that up a good bit to reflect what we feel like were comments we received last time. Here on the left is the detail again for that fluted column. So like I said, we've taken kind of invert flutes that are existing on the canopy piece and some little moldings and repeated it here. And then the details on the right are really representative of some of these balcony edge conditions where we've got the cast stone bands coming across. It was a challenge for us to try to figure out how those worked as they go in front of the balconies because we're ruling them to be continuous as they went around the building. But we think what you'll see here is reflective upon keeping that same design. Same thing with the FRP fascias on those. We've really done a lot of work to make sure that those maintain their location as far as being continuous around the facade and not really being affected by the balcony interruptions. This is the top of those balconies facing the west side. So again, the FRP cornice that continues around the rest of the building also continues here and then sits upon those FRP column wraps on the western facade. And then here's where I really want to make sure you guys understood the amount of detail that was in this brickwork. Our team spent a lot of time going through this, making sure it coursed out with the modular brick that we selected that you see below. So a lot of these you can see, and this is representative of the typical pilasters on King Street, on Line Street, really on all four facades. And it may not have been apparent on the last drawing set of preliminary, but you can see all those header courses that are stacked in there. We've got a lot of recesses back and forth in there, so you get lots of play on the light and the texture of the brick between the basket weave pattern and the stacked brick that I think are really contributing to the design of the building. The base is a little simpler. It's just, again, horizontal banding that's recessed 1/2 inch with that black brick interwoven in between, but it all ties again up the building as it goes. These are the inset panels at the tops I had mentioned previously. So we've kind of got two different motifs here. Over the main, again, I call them retail entries. We've got the canopies. We kept a running bond of brick in there for potential signage at some point or just being simplified. The rest of them have the basket weave that you see on the bottom 3 images, and those are really occurring over windows on the facades. And the one that's, I think, the most unique is actually on the top right. That exists only on the corner tower where, I don't know if Morris, you can zoom on it. It's kind of a, say, a modified basket weave in there, or you guys can see it if you want to, but
yeah, I wouldn't mess with that computer too much. It's cranky.
This is the other portions, and I'll call these the brick spandrel panels that occur basically at the 3rd floor line. So these again have a marble inlay in the center surrounded with a black brick banding, and some of the lighter brick and dark bricks you kind of see there. Again, it references some of the same details that occur on the pilasters, just in a different pattern. We'll get through our window schedule unless you guys really care a lot about that. And then these, again, these are more of our standard uses. The one thing I did want to point out on these, just to note, is our windows are set back a little over 6 inches from the face of brick. So we did try to set those back as far as possible. We'll look to work through some shop drawings as far as where that occurs, but we don't see any reason why they should need to move any further out from that. And then again, some of the same details for the upper floors, just we have double stud and wood stud, and keeping the same plane. So that's what the station.
Tempted and fate. Tempted and fate, Mr. Stout.
Yeah, so I know again, this is something we'll get reviewed at the staff level, but we'll start to show an idea of what that mock-up panel may be. Making sure we captured all the materials on here, just from the standpoint of getting all the details worked out ahead of time. And then really just the comparison before and after of that rendering of preliminary to final. And this is all legal in the final one here. So I appreciate your time. I'm happy to entertain the questions you may have.
Are there any questions for the applicant? No. Seeing none? It's time to have a seat. Any member of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda item? None? Ms. Parrish, staff comments,
I'm gonna
recommendations?
share a few observations first. The building has changed very little in its fundamental arrangements of major components and massing and continues to fit well in its context. Detailing has evolved well since the preliminary review, with a great deal of richness and visual interest to the use of multiple brick colors mixed with other materials. Materials should be explicitly reviewed and approved at this time by the board. Staff verifies that the application meets the minimum requirements, and additional drawings have been provided to staff and board members for reference. Staff is satisfied that the applicant has addressed previous staff and board comments. A complete signage package has not been included in this or previous submittals, but as it is largely residential, main building and tenant signage should be minimal and relatively easy to handle at staff level. And also, it is expected, and you've been previewed, that there's a comprehensive mock-up drawings package that will be submitted at the appropriate time. Staff conditions if approved. Number one, and I'm not sure why they're not on the screen, but I can't say I'm surprised either.
We have lost the YouTube feed. There's a public presentation.
I will just say that the staff comments have been distributed to the board members. I'm gonna start reading them. While in pure elevation, the corner turret roof appears to be well proportioned. Foreshortening at grade level can make this element appear squatty as on Courier Square Phase 1 and as shown on the renderings on pages 32 and 33. Staff suggests a consideration for a restudy of the pitch on this roof to ensure it achieves the desired effect when viewed from a little closer to the building at ground level. Number two, much appreciated the recessed windows. We do have a comment about that on detail B3 sheet 29, and that's where the window frame setback is shown even as in aligned with the back corner of brick at the jamb with little solid behind the back of rod and sealant. While staff is appreciative of the desire to place the window as far back into the wall as possible, we recommend resetting this detail, allowing for a solid backing and reducing the setback enough, perhaps 1/4 of an inch, to ensure that the sealant has a good surface to bond to without resulting in an excessively wide inside corner. Number three, while lighting shown appears to be appropriate to the building context, staff would appreciate the applicant could address and speak to the overall extent of site lighting and impact to the building and site. Number four, on yours, it's there are recessed balconies on the northwest facing Line Street. The side lights on those have an additional vertical mutton, and I'm recommending omitting that vertical mutton at those recessed balconies so that the light proportions are consistent with the adjacent door. And number five, coordinate with the state and city to properly address any found grave sites. This is in reference to the location of the former St. James Methodist Cemetery. We're recommending final approval with board and staff conditions with materials approved and with final review by staff of the 4 permits set. And when we get this up and going, if there's some detail we need to look at, I'm happy to show it.
Very good. The applicant has an opportunity to respond to the city staff comments.
Boards interpret those without seeing concern.
You don't find any of those objectionable? Okay, and thank you for your thoroughness, but do we know anything about the whereabouts of St. James Cemetery? Not, might find out.
I can respond a little bit.
Sure.
We did a cultural resources study in 2021. We didn't find anything, but we were just made aware of that like about 2 days ago. But we will certainly endeavor to work through all rules and regulations for that.
I didn't mean to belabor it. I just.
No, I know, and I'm
I
very
knew it
comfortable
wandered in here.
with that condition, and legal's comfortable with this condition because it came up at the very last minute, so it's been vetted.
That happens. Yeah, very good. Board comments.
I'm comfortable with staff's comments. The only thing I would note is that in the 4 permit set, there's a few, in the details that are included in our packet, there are a few flashing conditions that might need revision that would have implications on the architecture. So that's something just to review in your QA.
I'd like to compliment the applicant on doing such a thorough job on the final, both with materials and with the level of detail. I can't tell you how on these larger projects, it seems like every time we get something that even though the architect will comment on it has obviously been value engineered, or they didn't do the diligence to figure out how something was going to fit together or work. This project does not bear those, I mean, you've obviously figured all that out before you came to see us, and that makes a big difference. The reason I say that is the richness of this facade, the level of detail, the quality of the materials is something that we habitually see getting washed out on the project. So thank you to the applicant for continuing to adhere to a very high design standard, material standard, and figuring out a way by and large to make it work. Mr. Metters.
I agree with Jake's comment about the flashing, but it's nothing that you're not going to work out. Are there any products that you've identified now that you're specifying in the finished product that you are aware might have a long lead time or might need to be value engineered?
I mean, I can't think of any, but we've worked pretty closely with obviously the Great Star construction team, and if we saw a concern to one, we definitely bring it to y'all's attention, but we haven't specified anything that's like out of the ordinary.
And I think it would be awesome if this project could have the best mock-up ever.
Well, I think they've got a lead on that because that I saw a slide with a mock-up panel.
That's right.
Drawn, and I think that's a first for me. So that's a step in the right direction.
Listen, thank you.
Further board comments? Hearing none, can I entertain a motion?
Did you have any comments? I'll introduce a motion for final approval with board and staff conditions. With materials approved and with final review by staff of the 4 permits.
Is there a second to Mr. White's motion? Mr. Metters, it's in proper order. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters.
Yay in favor.
Ms. Sobchak.
Yay in favor.
Mr. White.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Thank you to the applicant. Okay, that concludes our presentations from the general public, but we have 2 agenda items from VAR staff. Appreciate it.
I don't need to be over here, but it's kind of fun. So I will be. All right, so I'm bringing some policies. These are some loose ends that I would really love to tie up. Realize I may bounce back and forth between both boards, but gotta start somewhere. The first one is something that staff has identified a need for. We have this really great policy statement that gives from the board to staff authority for certain applications to be reviewed at staff. It's very clear, but one of the things that we find missing is a category for minor alterations. For the last 3 years, this policy statement is something we frequently pull out every time that we, especially at BARS, we go through agenda sorting. We're going through this, like, do we have the authority to take this off the board's shoulders? And a lot of times we do, but there's not a category for minor alterations. And so thinking about minor alterations, there's actually a lot of things that could fall into this. So let me give you some examples. Let's see, I'll go in order. A lot of times with existing structures, especially at BARS and also at BARL, we have alterations that are minimally visible, minor to the scale of the project, and are not going to impact any historic or architectural significance that we would love to just take and review and have the authority to do that. We also have seen a lot of material supply chain issues with the larger projects that you see. You know, recently we talked about a color of the tile that was approved in a mock-up that was changed. So I would love to have the authority to capture some of those changes, and I'll tell you how we'll do that. And then we sometimes have projects that get material, that we have requests for material upgrades, and they technically change the exterior of the building and the appearance, but who would say no to, say, you know, asphalt shingles to a copper roof? So we'd love to have the authority to do that if we feel like that upgrade is appropriate. So what I put together is text for minor alterations, and I will read it so I can explain it, but that first number 11 gives staff the authority for minor alterations, and then I've categorized these. So the alterations to existing structures, again, minimal in scale in relation to the overall building, minimally visible, not in close proximity to the public right of way, and we would consider the impacted elements historical and material significance and the impact on the building's overall design and facade. All right, that second category I talked about, alteration to a BAR approval. something that's probably under construction. We would review those alterations. We would consider the original intent of the approved design, element, material, or color in relation to the intent of the proposed alteration. The question is, what was the original intent, and is what's being proposed now a downgrade? And then that third one was a material upgrade. We would have the authority to review material changes that are not in kind, because an upgrade necessarily is not in kind, when the material is an upgrade over the existing and the alteration does not impact historic building fabric, and the alteration is not out of character for the structure's design or architectural language. I think there's a lot of things that fall in these categories that we sometimes feel, especially at the other board, silly bringing them to the board, but we, you know, the policy exists as the policy exists now. We don't have the authority to take them off. So we would love your feedback. I'll be presenting this tomorrow night at the other board, so there might be some back and forth. That's the end of my presentation.
So as I've thought about this,
Yeah.
I do think that times when I wish that some things have been approved and not come to the board. But there are other times when I sometimes could get bogged down in what I call the trickle down effect of what may seem to be a minor alteration now. You know, because you're in the thick of things and things are going quickly and something didn't come in because of, you know, what might be called a supply chain issue. It might be that, you know, an owner couldn't just make his mind up to tell an architect what they wanted. And so it takes, you know, they get behind on the schedule and then want to make a change because they couldn't make a decision. But the thing is, during that process, the change is made. And there's a lot going on, and it may not. Talking about not the majority of times, the minority of times, but you get to the end of the project and go, oh, wow, that was going to be a minor change, but the trickle down effect of the minor change is substantial. That's really my only comment.
Yeah, but we don't have to figure it out until it happens. So it's kind of, I don't know, we'll have to trust staff to decide what is minor in the end.
Yeah, it definitely puts that discretion in staff, which we're all very comfortable sending lots of things to the board. I will tell you that, but yeah, there's that.
Well, yeah, it depends on staff, and I like the way these are written because it's clear guidance to you, and it is discretionary, but you know, that's why we hire professionals for, you know, positions like these. You know, I support all this.
I support the changes too, but I would just bolster what James said. You know, at what point do a series of material alterations change the overall scope of the project and the intent of the board when it was approved? So subject to not having specific language to address that, and maybe crafting some, I'm in favor of the statement.
Yeah, I think if y'all are in a circumstance where you're seeing repeated little changes and it starts to look like death by 1,000 cuts, you would see that you would see that.
And at that point, your may would stop being a may and you come back. Would be my assumption.
And sometimes, I mean, we've had one recently, the culmination is like, no, you're going to the board.
Yeah. Good. Okay. I think we're all on the same page with that. Thank you, Tori. Agenda item number 5.
You don't
We
want to
need
vote on that?
We can, if we.
I'll introduce a motion to adopt policy statement as submitted. With board comment.
With board comments, I think that captures what I was trying to get at. We can see if they get tweaked. Luda seconded, so it's in proper order. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
Yea in favor.
Mr. Matters. Ms. Subcheck.
Yeah.
Mr. White.
Yea in favor.
Myself, yea in favor. Thank you, Tori.
Okay.
And I didn't mean to cut you off. I didn't know if you wanted to vote tonight or not. But as you said, you're trying to tie up loose ends. That was a good way to do it.
All right, well, here's another thing. We've talked before about proposed revisions to the sample panel guidelines. You also have that in your package, the red line set and the clean set, and I want to talk through some of that. Much of this we talked about at the retreat, and there's not been a whole lot of change on that. I'm gonna go through the changes. One change was we kind of all agreed on the sample panel as the name. We're still discussing that because there are mock-ups sample panels and sample boards. And so we feel like sample panels might be the better name for some of the smaller panels that BARS has. So that's one thing. And so what I've done is I've changed the title of the guidelines and then I just kind of called it a panel all the way through. And then another item that is on here is number 8. A mock-up panel shall be a default requirement for BA or L projects with ability of applicants to request a waiver at preliminary review. That was a suggestion that we've incorporated. So I believe everything else has been talked about, but feel free to read it and we can talk about any of it.
I like that it's both mock-up and sample because it does make a difference. And then standard AIA contract language, we often make reference to mock-ups in individual specifications. And we use that to make sure they know that they have to build what we do.
A sample is like those samples
Yeah.
they bring for the.
And I know from my private work for benefit of architects that don't work in Charleston, that sample panel gets used for a lot of stuff. So if they're coming here, that might be very helpful to say that it's all inclusive. And your language on number 6 is also very thoughtful because it cuts to the chase on what we're expecting from the applicant and that to the extent that they're complaining about costs, they should find ways to address that.
And if you're gonna build it that big, put doors, a window and a roof on it. So
Be able to rehab it for something else.
That's right. Very good. Other board comments on that policy statement? Here now, I assume you're comfortable with the vote tonight if we'll give it to
I'm
you.
comfortable with the vote.
Very good. Is there a motion to approve incorporating board and staff comments?
so moved.
Is there a second? Mr. Metter seconds. Mr. Brown, how do you vote? Yea in favor. Mr. Metter? Yea in favor. Ms. Shelton? Mr. White?
Yea in favor.
Myself, yea in favor. Thank you to all of staff for a thoughtful presentation. And much midnight oil burned, getting it right.
Thank you very much.
All right, we stand adjourned. Ended up being